Hello, everybody, and welcome to Crushing Comics. I'm your host, Peter, often known throughout the internet as Crisis with a K, and I'm here with two of my favorite mutants from around the world, Tyler and Fariha. Tyler, would you say you're more fair or more foul?
It depends on who you ask.
Yes, because that's often in the eye of the beholder. And Fariha, so many people have been locked up in their houses and in their bubbles recently. If you could go to a hotel and find something left for you on your pillow, what would you want that to be?
Like candies, heart-shaped candies, something like that.
It's like hotel mints never seemed fun before, but now.
Yeah, exactly, right? Like little I would take candy.
Okay, but not a pretentious tarot card.
No, please. I don't want tarot cards where the hotel chain is calling me a fool. That's weird. That shouldn't happen. I don't want Hilton to call me that. Like, come on now. Like, I'm the customer. What is
that?
This?
Is like the best X-Men panel to me. This issue. It's like, come on!
Full! So if you can't tell already, this is our full spoiler discussion of this week in X, and we just have one issue of X of Swords, which is X of Swords Stasis. It's chapter 11 of 22. We're right in the middle. It's written by Hickman and Howard, and it's drawn by Pepe Larraz and Mahmud Asrar, and we're right in the middle of things. So we're going to tackle this issue more or less sequentially after we give some first impressions right now. And again, full on spoilers. We're going to be talking about this, other things leading up to this, possibly even other things happening in the Marvel Universe as we take this apart page by page. So Fariha, why don't we start with you? What did you think of Stasis? Did it earn the name Stasis?
I was in stasis when I was reading it. I don't know if that makes sense. So last week I said that I was in almost very close to canceling my order for the hardcover. This week, I'm kind of glad I didn't because of that one page that is going to look awesome and oversized, and I cannot wait to see that. And I know you know which one I'm talking about.
Maybe.
And at the same time, the way the issue reads, I've been talking about Marvel Cosmic. This is kind of what you find at the very end of every Marvel Cosmic omnibus. The whole chapter of how things are, who's who, that interaction. Why it's in the smack dab in the middle, I don't know, but here we are, and we're going to talk about it.
What about you, Tyler?
I mean, that is one of Hickman's main fault, or one of the main criticism of his writing, right? He likes to build worlds, but he doesn't really write characters well. And what I find missing here is the emotional core, the attachment for me, because the X-Men is really not present in this issue. I mean, they're there, but they don't do much. There's no development on their end. And, we get another issue of a lot of world, like building the world. But, and we are in the middle of this crossover right now. So I feel like, this is not, that's the reason, I think, why it doesn't work very well for me at this point.
So I guess it's down to me to be slightly a counter to those two, although that is how I felt among originally reading it. But here's the thing that I did appreciate about it. It's a convergence point. Like, it actually feels like we're on hold because things are coming together. We finally get some sense made of all the Otherworld kingdoms, which we're going to be talking about in just a moment. We finally figure out who the other 5 swords people are on Team Arrako, which if you don't follow Marvel social media, you wouldn't have known yet. And we finally kind of get each of the swords people from the mutant side kind of facing their fate all at once. So even if nothing happens, which is I think why we could call it stasis in a kind of very classical way, it actually really points us to what's going to happen in the rest of the crossover, which I think is a good thing. And I'm actually kind of willing to forgive an amount of source bookiness of it, partially because I think the art is beyond outstanding. Like, this is some of the best art I've seen in a while. And I know you hear me keep praising the art. I praised Carmen Carnero a couple of weeks ago, but this is some really next level stuff. So that helped hold my attention a bit. But I do still have the feeling that I wish the crossover had been like all the things up till now, I think should have just been one-shot issues that all were simultaneous to each other. And then it should have started, this should have been the final one shot, and then it should have started next week, I think. But here we are in the middle, so that's where we are. So look, at the beginning of this issue, we get all of the Otherworld kingdoms, of which there are 10, coming together to talk to Saturnine to take a vote. And the vote is on if they should be allowed to freely pass between kingdoms. Now, through all the tie-in issues up to this point, we've been getting these data pages of all the kingdoms, some of which are familiar to us, but many of which are not. And for me, it's been hard to kind of focus on them because I'm like, who are these people? What is it about? Like, let me see a character design. Let me see the art. And we were just kind of seeing their little wedges around the kingdoms. But now that I've seen them all in action and I went back and read all the stuff, I kind of get it a little bit more. I don't know. We are going to go through all of them, but before we do you feel like it kind of snapped together a little bit more for you this time now that they're in action together?
Well, I was really annoyed by the random pages that were just showing up in the middle of an issue,
right,
and then I had to read all. Yeah. I mean, yeah. To me, I am all about prose book. I read all kinds of books. I cannot stand when it's combined. Like, you know, when it's like you have to read you have to read and see the art, but then you have to stop dead and then read a bunch of paragraphs and then go back. Well, which is pretty much what Docs has been. But the thing is, like, at least when it's Marauders and Jerry Duggan's writing it, it's fun. But these ones were very dry information, and they were not pretty much in line with what was going on in the issue at length. So it was very hard to, as you were saying, to connect it. But now we finally see them all together, and then it makes sense,
right,
what all of those things mean.
Tyler?
I kind of like it, partly because I am the sort of person who is like, you know, here is a bag of puzzles. You don't have the complete picture. I am the one who'll be like, oh, I'm excited, because I will break open the puzzles and I'll try and figure out what the puzzle is the final picture is, instead of someone who is like, why do you give me this set of jigsaw puzzle with no pictures? Like, it's not going to work for me, you know? So for me, I like it. I mean, I kind of like to try and connect the dots if there are any, which there are quite a few here, actually, if, you know, in this issue in particular.
Well, we're about to do some dot connecting. So we're not going to just read you the data pages that you've seen about these 10, but we're going to try to walk through the opening pages, if you have this issue in front of you, to give some context about who we're seeing, the order we're seeing them in, and who they are. And so if you can take a look at the radial that's presented on any one of these data pages or back in the original X of Swords creation, we're starting on the east side, which is if it was a clock around 4 o'clock, because the first thing that we see in this parade of invitations is an invitation to the Crooked Market. Now, the Crooked Market is the regent there is Mad Jim Jaspers, who is a character from the 1980s Captain Britain comic books. And its placement is in the east. It's just below the fair court of Mercator and above the foul court of Blightspoke. So it's the northernmost foul court on that side. So it was profiled in Wolverine 6. The Crooked Market is the ultimate black market. It's a port city on the edge of every reality. It began as a refuge for Mad Jim Jaspers, but since then it's flourished. It's a labyrinth that's just flush with wealth, but also with corruption and also with violence. And in this moment, it's interesting how the art reflects that, because we see Mad Jim Jaspers at this elevated platform. It's almost like he's a judge in the British court, or he's like a crazy accountant with all of his papers around him, and you can't even you almost can't even see his face. So it kind of emphasizes the kind of opulent wealth, but then if you look around the room, it's just piles of stuff everywhere. Do we have any other thoughts on the Crooked Market? This is really the only mention they get in this whole sequence.
Yeah. I mean, I wish that the art is a little bit more crooked.
Not because crooked enough.
The panel is a little bit skewed, and the tiles on the floors are like sort of rounded and not symmetrical, but the rest of the items looks very, very like strictly straight up, and so that was the one thing that I noticed. And then there's another thing about this. So this is a market, so money plays a role here. Coins. And where does coins appear in this issue?
Including pentacles, which can also be coins.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then it says that could money be in his future?
It'll be very interesting. That's why I think it's important we do some dot connecting now with the Otherworld kingdoms, because I think it does slightly influence some of the reading of the tarot cards at the end, personally.
Yeah.
Fariha, anything on this one, or shall we roll on?
No, I was just one thing I want to ask as a new mutant is that does these parts shows up in other X-Men before, or they're all brand new?
Well, except for Avalon.
Other than Avalon, yeah.
And sort of
These
the
are all
implication
brand new.
of Roma and Merlin kind of splitting the Fae. If I'm not totally mistaken, I think we see some of that Fae world in the Wisdom Marvel Max miniseries that preceded Captain Britain and MI-13 in the kind of like mid-late 2000s. But I don't think it was explicitly labeled as like, this is a kingdom of the Otherworld, but we have seen the Fae part of Otherworld before. Megan has a connection to it, so that's not brand new. Same with the Furies. Like, a lot of these kingdoms are drawn from one little sliver of Captain Britain mythology that has been kind of exploded to be a whole kingdom, which this is, right? The whole Mad Jim Jaspers having a whole kingdom is one example of that.
Yeah. And I mean, the other thing also, of course, is this Jim Jasper, I think, is not our reality's Jim Jasper. But he is also a reality warper, if I remember correctly.
No, I mean, I was just like, just wanting to know what's new and what's old.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing, it seems like other than Avalon, everything is fairly brand new.
Relatively
and this is like an
new.
expansion. Yeah. Okay.
So as these scenes continue, you will find that we go, and I don't know which way you can see my video, but we're going counterclockwise around the circle, but we skip a couple along the way. So if we were just going counterclockwise, the next one to the north is Mercator, but we actually skip Mercator, and the next scene that we get on the next page is a scene in the kingdom of Sevalith. And they are also seen receiving an invite. Now, Sevalith, the regions are Countex Ublia and Countex Oscura. Its placement is in the northeast. It's above Mercator. The next one is Jamie Braddock's Avalon, so it is a fair court. It was profiled in Marauders 13, and Sevalith is one of the Otherworld's longest-running kingdoms. It's a land of brutalist architecture and vampiric aristocracy of warring subnations obsessed with political infighting and hoarding wealth. So while Sevalith is home to a cadre of deadly assassins, actually, usually it's somewhat diplomatic when it interacts with the other kingdoms, partially just because they're all kind of these vampiric creatures, and their lives are long and it moves slowly. It's like dealing with Ents. They're like, we don't have time for this Hobbit nonsense. Like, we're busy counting up, like our blood farms. So even though they have deadly assassins, they're not actually considered to be all that deadly, is the implication that I got from the data page. And I think, brutalist architecture is that those kind of like concrete slab architecture, just huge slabs of concrete, very 1970s for some places.
Very, very East German.
Very German, yeah. And even though this page has some really beautiful angles to it, you'll notice there is not a curve to be found in the architecture of this page. It's all just slants and lines, and it really kind of echoes. And they didn't say brutalist in so many words in the page, but it just screamed it at me when I saw the page. So any other thoughts on the Vampire Kingdom? Again, we don't really get a lot other than this from them in this one.
Well, I think that the other thing about the art is that the frame of the throne thing looks a little bit like a stylized coffin.
Yes. Right, they make the comparison between like their cathedrals are coffins and this kind of merge of the holy and the profane, which is very much part of who they are. Yeah. Which is interesting that they're a fair court. Like, doesn't that sound like a foul court to you?
Well, I mean, hedonistic is also a fair court.
Right.
So that's kind of like, I don't know how
what are the rules?
Yeah.
All right. Onward to the next one then. So the next one we are continuing. We're going to skip over Avalon, who are at the peak of the clock. And the next one is Infuri. And so that's the one we see at the bottom of that page, is Infuri, the Everforge. And here are some thoughts on Infuri, the Everforge. Its regent is Forge Master Federal Fury. Its placement is in the northwest. It's above Roma's floating kingdom and just next to Jamie's Avalon at the top of the clock. It was profiled in X-Force 13. The Everforge, I should have given these out so we could take turns. Sorry, I didn't think about that.
That's okay.
The Everforge, some of them are tongue twisters.
You're doing wonderful.
The Everforge is a feudal kingdom of Sybiite warriors. Its fearsome furies defeated a celestial and they chained it to a star, but then they took the star, which is now the hottest structure in the universe, and they embedded it into the ground, which is why it is the Everforge. It is literally an everlasting forge for their endless weapon production. We've seen the Furies many times. They're originally a Captain Britain villain. They are connected to the original Mad Jim Jaspers. We saw them again a little bit in Excalibur. We've seen them again when Chris Claremont has come back to Uncanny X-Men during House of M. They're pretty steadily kind of like the big scary weapon of the Captain Britain mythos. And we here see a whole group of them receiving the invite. Anything?
And I think,
good for them.
Yes, there is a thing here is that there's a line here in the description that says, weapons forged at the heart of the living sun star are unbreakable. And which of our sword is unbreakable?
Wolverine's? The more
No.
No? Masamura? No?
No, it's Skybreaker is unbreakable.
So that might connect to Storm somehow.
Yes, and where does vibranium comes from? It comes from a meteorite that is a remnant of a world where the sun went supernova.
Tyler
so it came
always
from here?
comes with receipts.
Yeah, so much receipts. Oh,
Yeah, and this
Like,
one, and this is, they defeated a celestial who lives in the sun. So
Quite possibly
I
connected.
think there's some connection here.
All right. Well, the one thing I'll add to that is the Furies always have reminded me of the mindless ones from Doctor Strange, because they're kind of a little formless. They have that like kind of merged eye, and they're not like really brainy. They kind of just show up to kind of destroy whatever, and they're made to be very fearsome when there's one of them. But then when they are needed for impact, and there's a lot of them, all of a sudden they're like easier to beat up. So to me, they've always kind of been one and the same as the mindless ones. So I'm interested to see how they're pushed in this more kind of like warlike technological direction here.
Mm-hmm.
So we skip the top of... Oh, go ahead, Freya.
No, I was just going to say that if it is connected to vibranium, wouldn't you have wished that T'Challa was there instead of Brian the human?
Brian the human.
I'm still so mad about it. Move on, Tyler.
All right. So the next one, now we're all the way to what would be 9 o'clock on the other side of the clock, and this is the floating kingdom of Roma Regina. The regent is Lady Roma, who we of course know not only from Captain Britain, but from X-Men. She is the one who saves the X-Men from death in Uncanny X-Men 225 and lets them come back to life and live their lives in Australia free of any electronic surveillance. So its placement's on the west side. It is just north of Merlin's Foul Fae, and it's just beneath the Infuri. So this was profiled in X Factor 4. It was the first one we saw profiled because we theoretically kind of understand it a little bit better since Roma's a familiar figure to us. It's described, as Freya I think pointed out, as hedonistic and a lusty pleasure zone. It's a kingdom of free love and lawlessness in opposition to Roma's father's strict and repressive rule. So despite a lack of rules, they thrive in this kind of like kind version of chaos. It's just Roma rules gently and everybody just goes along with it. But also, which if you did not understand why the art is upside down here, we learn that it's upside down so that if an unwanted visitor walks in, they just plummet into the endless sky. And then the final note is that in the middle, at the center, there is a supermassive obelisk that shines at night and is black by day. So this is like the upside down, basically, of the Otherworld. It's the free lovin' upside down. Everybody's just happy, and somehow it creates a social glue to hold it together. Did you ever peg Roma as like a free love hippie mama from any of her past appearances, Tyler?
No. I thought she appears in the past more like a Earth Mother type of character. Rather than a geisha, which is what is being drawn light here, I think.
Freya, what were you going to add there?
No, I was just gonna say I have a question once you've gone through all the descriptions. I'm gonna ask, just remind me about that. And it starts from this. It's spins out of
Well,
this.
I have another thing which I think is kind of a stretch. Where in this whole series, right, from Hotspots to Dogs, have we seen an upside down panel?
You have to tell us.
Is it?
We don't remember these things.
Was it the
I
no
don't remember
place? I
these
can't
things.
remember. I remember
Yes.
it was like a big deal when we
In
saw
life,
a panel upside
in Life
down.
9, when Rasputin and Cardinal walked into that black gate, it was upside down.
That's right.
My mind just blown. Seriously.
But this is, I mean, I think for
Receipts.
this is kind of my point
Receipts.
about rereading it and starting to feel more interested in it. It feels like
Yeah.
it's the first time in a while that some of these thematic things have really like come together all in one place. And that's what we loved last year. I'm not saying every issue needs to be about this, but if you read this issue and you're kind of like, meh, like that's why we're having this conversation with you
Yeah.
right now, because this is our way of being like, it's a little bit more than that. So we continue around the invitation cycle. Now we're descending on the clock to like the 8 o'clock, 7 o'clock range to the Holy Republic of Fae. It's the first of the Foul Courts on the bottom half of the clock. And this is, the regent is Merlin. So its placement is in the west. It's adjacent to Roma's fair floating kingdom above and directly above the Hothive, which boy do I have some thoughts on in a moment. So this was also profiled in X Factor 4. It's described as a joyless version of a fairyland. So it's fairyland with all of the color and life drained away because Merlin is obsessed with law and order. And his attempts to impose rules on the unruly fakes, they're fairies, man. They just want to dance around and be happy. But he's turned it into a magical world that's now turned into something that sounds a lot like industrial era or coal era Britain. And historically, in most stories, fairies do not like iron. They do not let that. Usually, iron or iron shavings is a way to defeat or to get rid of fairies. But this is specifically described as full of glass, copper, and iron towers. And that Merlin travels with a fierce group of elven soldiers. And then there's just the image here, which is like he's in a torture chamber.
Dungeon,
It's a dungeon, which also has a little bit of like a sexual S&M vibe to like contrast it with the panel we just saw of Roma's above. And then there's somebody in a stockade with a pig head. There's a lot. We could just do a whole episode on the classical symbolism of this one panel.
Yeah.
But Fariha, did you have any thoughts on Merlin's S&M dungeon?
No, my question was actually like, this is the Merlin that we know, like, you know, the Merlin that the Excalibur, and then, you know, the traditional Merlin the magician that we know.
Supposedly, it is that Merlin.
King Arthur and all of that. Aw, why are they so sad now?
Well, I mean, so the idea is that in the Marvel universe that Merlin was a sorcerer supreme, but that also he's in the Otherworld, and so they kind of like play it both ways, because much like the Captain Britain Corps, the Merlin in the Otherworld is kind of like all Merlins. So there's like a little bit of a muddy line between the two, is the best answer I can give off the cuff.
Yeah, well, I mean, I was kind of freaked out by that one panel. I was like, "There's too much going on." At first, I thought that this was a sex dungeon, right? But then I remembered.
You mean, the chain up one is just for fun? It's like bondage.
I don't know. Listen, I don't like, you know.
I mean, nobody seems like they're getting hurt. If they're all consenting, we're fine with it, I think is our message as the Hicksman report.
Yes, exactly. Like, do you want to have a pig head put on you? I mean,
no.
That's
I don't think it's a pig head that's put on them. I think it's like a humanoid with an animal head.
A pigatar, whatever that would be.
Well, that's what I meant. Like, you know, do you want your head to be turned into a pig? That's okay if it's like, you know, that's floating your boat. No, I was just like, I mean, I was like freaked out. So I actually this is like the only one that I went back to read. And it's like, what is this about?
Well, I think it's like really interesting how to even put this
contrast
as they react to each other, they're overreacting to each other. Like Roma in the past was, I think, a little bit more sensible, and Merlin was a little bit more whimsical at points, but they've almost like occupied the opposite sides in their quest to like one up each other after their father-daughter breakup, you know? I wouldn't have been shocked if they had assigned the places in the opposite way.
Okay.
I would not want to be in a happy sex place with Merlin.
Maybe it just was a little bit more palatable narratively to put Roma up there. But we have no judgments here at the Hickman Report.
I think like a woman running a sex place is much different than some dude running it. Like
Really?
Anyway.
We are not going to pursue that one. I'm using my moderator powers. Don't make me mute the mics. Okay. So
One question. Does the guards in that Merlin panel looks a little bit like Black Knight?
Sorry, I have the panels open here.
I mean, they're in that style. They're kind of like a weird style where the helmet is that very kind of like classical knight helmet, but then their jackets are almost more like a colonial or post-colonial British jacket.
That's
so
true.
it's kind of shows its connection to Avalon, right? That he's maybe like absconded with some knights from Avalon, which used to be his home.
That's true.
All right, so now we're into the actual court of Saturnine in real time as we continue still around the circle, right? So next was Hothive, and oh boy, did I have some questions about this after digging back in. So Hothive's regent is Vesperidae, the colony queen. It's the southwest kingdom. It's between Merlin's Republic of Fae above and Dryador on the bottom, which is the kingdom that's been taken over by Amenth. It was profiled in New Mutants 13. Hothive was once a bustling hive city, just like a giant conglomeration of multiple hives with multiple queens, but it's since been invaded by a parasitic force. Previously, it was like really insular, and they had these amazing guards, and kind of nobody came in, and they were all single-minded with individualized tasks, much like a real hive. But this parasite, somehow it was smaller and more insidious than any guard could just stab, and it basically gradually infects them all until this queen is the only one left. It eventually infects all of her sisters. It infects the queen, but then because she was the last one to show individuality, she is allowed to be the first one to speak for them and be their ruler, but nobody knows like what they are now. Like what is it now? It's not the Hothive that it was before. Does this sound like any other X-Men villains that we know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
Ooh. Tell me.
Akia and Sublime.
And also the Phalanx.
That's true.
Yeah, like we have a lot of Akia and Sublime, are both I almost said botanical, biological, and technological kind of infection, and then the Phalanx, consumes each human host that it touches and spreads throughout the biology. And there's this idea of a hive all working as one hive mind, all directed together. It sounds a lot like the stuff that we talked about in Powers of X back in Hoxpox.
And there's also another sort of connection with the sword, because the summoner's sword is called Colony.
And when we get to the description of Summoner later, there's something about him that sounds a lot more like the Hive than it does anything about Amenth. All right. So then the bugs speak their little language, and the Saturnine's assistant says believe that's a nay because they don't want to invite people into their borders. That's what we're voting on. We skip over Amenth for a moment, and now we come back to Avalon, which we skipped earlier. So Avalon, we skipped them kind of because they already got summoned. Like that's what happened in Excalibur 13. So Avalon's friendly to Krakoa. It's the place that Earth usually enters through the Otherworld. The Mad Monarch is King Jaime Braddock. It's at the northernmost point. It was profiled in Hellions number 5. And the thing to be reminded of is that Avalon is effectively the land of British mythology. So with its history and landscape is closely tied not only to the legend of King Arthur Pendragon, but also to the fates and the health of the British Empire itself. So if you've been reading Excalibur all along, it was briefly taken over by Morgan Le Fay. That was the first arc of Excalibur. She is deposed, and we see Jaime Braddock installed as the ruler without too much fanfare, and he's adorned with his sinister plumage cape here. But is there really, and his backup is like a unicorn, because of course.
I know.
So do we really have anything else to say about Avalon in this context? Who's open to visitors? They love visitors.
Well, I mean, they were not summoned. They were not like summoned there earlier. It was the call for a council, and they arrived a day earlier. I think that's how it was mentioned. And I just love that Jimmy is like, no, I'm not going to be overdressed now. I'm just going to wear the cape. And that's it.
That's it. Which is much more in keeping. We showed Fariha after last week that Excalibur cover that we're always referencing with Jaime with his banana hammock underwear. And so Jaime wearing only plumage is much more in keeping with the Jaime Braddock that we all know and probably don't really love.
So after you showed me that cover, I dreamt about it.
It's never gonna leave. I think about it constantly.
Like I dreamt about it.
Like,
I hate you guys for that.
And also just like Megan, who's like been shrunk into this weird little like pig
Fat
form.
potato woman or whatever.
It haunts me. So now we also go back for one of the other ones we skipped, which is Mercator, and this was mysterious before, and it's mysterious still. It's east. It's just above the Crooked Market, so it's the first one we skipped on the other side of the clock, around 2 o'clock on a clock. It's profiled in Marauders 13. It was previously the home to the Telementes, which were inter-reality refugees that had bodies of pure light, and their original reality like couldn't handle them anymore. They were evolved past it. And Saturnine, in a benign moment, was like, you could have a kingdom and be part of Otherworld, but something happened. There was an audible pop, and then the kingdom went dark. And so now they're being ruled by Mr. Mercator. Nobody knows what that means. And this is 2 of his Mercators who are here wordlessly. And Saturnine, as frustrated as she gets with anybody, is extra frustrated with them. She is like, if you're not going to talk, don't even bother coming to the parliament next time.
Yeah.
That's how I usually do my meetings. Like, I don't like, I don't like people who don't participate in meetings. It's like, there's a reason I invited you. So, I related to Saturnine at that moment. Not necessarily other time, but at that moment.
So now we finally come to the only one.
Before that.
Oh, go ahead.
This is not, well, I did not connect the dot, but someone else on X Twitter did. I can't remember his profile name, so sorry. But Mercator is the last name of Mr. M.
Huh.
Who is
Mr.
also
M was kind of a Civil War House of X, or House of M era minor X-Men character.
After the decimation, I think there was this mini series called the 198 or something, and he plays a pretty major role there. I think before that he was in X Corp or something, and he is also a reality warper.
Kind of seeming
too many reality warpers.
It's kind of like they all headed to Otherworld.
Yeah. He's also on the list of Omega mutants.
That's right.
And I think the status there, he says, was mentioned unknown. So now,
or as they would say in New Zealand, unknown. So the last one, having skipped Dryador, which is at the true south, is Blightspoke. So it doesn't really have a region per se. It's right below the Crooked Market, which brings us back to where we started. So it's like 4 o'clock and a clock. It was profiled in Cable 5. This place is poison. This place is poison. It's a death trap that leeches life and demands sacrifice. It's a veritable graveyard. It's not only the graveyard for the people who visited, but it's kind of like the garbage dump of discarded, dangerous trash from other realities, which kind of also makes it a little bit of a treasure trove because of so many valuable things to be found there. Kind of makes sense why it's next to the Crooked Market.
Okay.
And the only kind of face of it who we get to see here is Gia Whitechapel, who is the sheriff. I mean, major East of West vibes if you've ever read Hickman's East of West. This is
definitely
him. He's pretty much just doing East of West fanfic in X-Men right now. And so it turns out that Geo is the one, and her crew, who it's like a bear and a skirt, a man in a plague mask who could be from America right now for all we know, and a dog with a crown. They wanted to open the borders because she basically wants to like plunder all the other ones, and so her vote is denied and the borders are not going to get opened. And she's basically like, I'm going to take what I want, and then everybody's like, because nobody, they all start to squabble. So, they all start to squabble.
So I googled Gia Whitechapel the first time I read the write up and I did not click on any of the link.
Yes, I have not googled it, nor do we want to explain it here, but I've heard that it's not safe for work.
No, it's not safe for work.
Oh.
Not safe for work.
So
why?
Google
Tell
it,
me. Now
but do not click on it on the link. I did not click on it because of the description. I was like, okay, this is not the right thing.
Yes.
And does
so
Gia gives you
interested
a Kate Pride type of vibe there?
I mean, in that she's like a lady in a beautiful red jacket, but then she's also very Carmen Sandiego with the hat.
With the hat.
She's got Wonder Woman boots on with little wings on them. I mean, she's definitely meant to, and she's got the Kate, pirate lapel cape.
Yeah.
Larraz definitely packed in his references in this panel visually. So now, finally, At the end of this long segment, we come to what used to be known as Dryador, which is now the fiefdom of Amenth. Its regions are famine and pestilence. It is the bottommost southern kingdom on this clock. It is 6 o'clock in the clock. It's the gateway to Arrako and Amenth beyond it. It was profiled in Hellions 5. Dryador used to be a kingdom of the 70 seas, but it has now been engulfed with flames of war. The oceans have all been boiled away, and the horsemen now consider it a sovereign extension of Arrako, and by extension, in its way, Amenth. And that's kind of what this whole fight is about. So I don't think the people who used to live in Dryador are much of a factor based on what we see here, because it seems like they've all been killed. He says, this was Dryador. We've killed their childless king and poisoned every drop of their oceans with Dryador blood. We've not killed Dryador's leaders. We have killed Dryador.
It was very South America, you guys. Like, you know, it's like a very much of like killed South America with drugs. I don't know. Like, you know, there was like, so that was like all the different faction of the kingdom, right?
Yeah,
all the other worlds.
I don't even have my water bottle. I'm like out of breath.
You should have actually told us to do a
I know.
description. But now that we have come to the end of it, my question was, if you were to live in one of these places, which one would you have picked? They're not, a lot of them are not necessarily livable, you know, like if you think about it.
You know, I don't think the crooked market really sounds all that bad. Like, yeah, it's corrupt, but it's like, so is the world. Like, it kind of just seems like it doesn't really seem like that far of a fancy from reality compared to the other 9 of them. Like, I certainly don't want to live in the Hothive or with the vampires, although I do like brutalist architecture. I don't know. What about you, Tyler?
Roma.
If
I'm invited.
So you don't want to fall into the sky.
I want to fall.
I think you will be invited. But I think, like, I don't know, for some reason, the crooked market also kind of spoke to me.
Yeah.
Maybe because, you know, it reminded me a little bit of that. And then also because it reminded me, like, Nowhere from Guardians of the Galaxy. You know, it just had that vibe to it. So I was like, I can survive in crooked market. I can make some deals there. And then, you know, just lay low and hang about. Make some money. Like, yeah, I could do that.
Well, also, if you've ever read, and I think you have, Neil Gaiman's Neverwhere, it's very much like the underground market in Neverwhere, which I also love.
Yeah, so it's very much like that underground market feel, and feel like, you know, also Star Wars. I have so many places like that, so I feel like I can survive there. So I mean, you know, that kind of interested me. Like, it's like, oh, which one I would pick.
So granted, if you had not reviewed all of those data pages, and they aren't even recapped in the barest way here with a recap of the overall map, I could understand why you would have breezed through those pages in like a minute, which I did on my first read, quite honestly. And then we end this section with a brief scene of all of the swords people on Krakoa coming back to the circles. Where did we go? I don't know, because they were in their circles already at the end of the previous issue, but now they're stepping back into the circles. And the only really significant thing here is Apocalypse has this line, "They stand to lose forever in paradise," which is a very religiously loaded statement. He's talking about, you know, this is not just a tournament, this is not just death. You stand to lose forever in paradise, which is very much how like heaven is often explained in many different religious faiths. But here he's referring to forever in paradise as Krakoa. Is Krakoa forever in paradise? Do you feel that way?
On surface, it's pretty much like, you know, how America is propagandized as the land of the dream. It's kind of is, but there is, as we have mentioned before in our previous episodes, there is still a lot of problems there. So it's not necessarily heaven. I wouldn't say that. You know, it's only someone who has a seat in the High Council would say. Quiet Council, sorry. Someone who had a high seat in the Quiet Council, he's the only one who is saying those shit.
Well, they are also trying to protect the really young mutants. So for them, you know, it could really be a bit of a paradise. And also knowing that they can die. So to some, it might be like, you know, it's fine. It's great.
Empath is back, but my mutant cousin who died, you know,
still caught in the paperwork.
Yeah, he's still caught in the paperwork. I'm still upset about that.
I just think it's an interesting reversal for Apocalypse, who, as we see, we're starting to get some of the psychology behind his survival of the fittest. And I just think it's really interesting to hear a character like Apocalypse basically being promising forever in paradise. Like, he's not somebody who has promised a lot of paradise in his past. He's somebody who promises constant conflict. But then interesting how he's basically using the promise of paradise here to drive them to the kind of conflict that he is known for. Like, it's just a very loaded moment, a very loaded statement for me, for Apocalypse to be the one.
After Cable basically goaded him into saying something.
Yeah. Where's the pep talk, Blue Daddy?
Yeah.
So we end.
I honestly thought that, I honestly thought that Storm should be the one giving a pep talk.
I felt like that was a very Storm line.
Yeah, very, Storm, she's very good at giving pep talks, as little I've seen. But the thing is, it came from Apocalypse. I'm like, okay, sure, whatever.
Well, doesn't it kind of feel in keeping too with Storm's role as the preacher, the announcer? She's the one who leads all the ceremonies and says, my brother, my sister. Because I had that feeling too, it kind of feels like what Storm's job is currently on Krakoa.
Hype woman?
Yeah.
Pep Tucker?
And Kate's protector.
Sorry. And Kate's protector, that's true. But yeah.
So this whole sequence, it ends on what I just think is a stunning layout on this page by Pepe Larraz, who we'll get to art after the next section, showing the 10 fighters for the opposite side, seeing the 9 fighters for Krakoa, because of course Gorgon has 2 swords, in their reflections. The reflections do not seem to necessarily line up with the people that they're going to be facing in battle, so let's not get too obsessed with that. But I mean, to fit 19 characters onto a page and to do it with this amount of order and structure and to carry off the forced perspective of looking through the reflection, I just think this is genius. I mean, this is why Larraz truly is not just like a great comic book artist. He's kind of beyond just being a great comic book artist. But we'll get there. Anyone else saw this page and just had their breath taken away though?
I mean, I told you when I started that I'm glad I'm now getting the oversized hardcover just because
this is the page.
Yeah.
This is the page.
This is the panel.
Yeah, this is the panel, because even if I sell that book, I may just cut that page off and then sell it.
It was missing the whole time. I don't know what you're talking about. I wanted the reverse of it. Like, I kind of wanted the X-Men side and the ARRAKO'S side, like side by side with the same version. Maybe we'll get like an alternate cover or like a poster of it at some point.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Ooh.
All right, deep breath, everybody. We're going into section 2 of our 3 guidebook sections. Section 2 follows the sword quest of the folks of ARRAKO and Amenth. And if you had assumed that we knew most of their swords people, because there's 4 horsemen, there's Summoner, and then there's Gold-Face Masked Lady, and that would be 6, you would be wrong, because 2 of the horsemen, as we saw, are currently acting as regents, and so they are not 2 of the swords bearers. So there are a number of people in this sequence who we meet who we did not necessarily meet before, which I found very interesting. I kind of intellectually knew, but I'm not somebody who stalks the solicits and the future covers. So I wasn't thinking ooh, when are we going to meet I just kind of assumed it was going to happen. And here we get it all kind of in one condensed blob. So we meet kind of 5 new people. The first one, who I think visually is the most arresting, and it should be remarked, this section is by Muhammad Asrar, also with Marta Gracia on colors, is Redroot, who is effectively the Doug Ramsey of ARRAKO. She doesn't seem to be a fan of the Endless Wars. She's kind of the speaker for the land in ARRAKO, and we see a kind of reverse color palette version of the Krakoa head as the ARRAKO head. And Redroot is pretty sassy, which is really interesting. I don't know, I really thought she was a cool character. What did you think about it?
Well, I think she's pretty cool. I mean, the first thought, of course, is that, this is the cipher version for ARRAKO. So, ARRAKO needs a speaker as well. And so, they appointed a mutant. Until I came to the data page of the Blades of ARRAKO, where Redroot the Forest is being described as pure blood mutant reclaimed from Amenth. So there's 2 things here. Pure blood. Where have we seen this before? And that is in Pox. So in Pox 3, I think, if I remember correctly, when they actually said, I think they define some of the mutants then in Life 9 to be pure blooded. I think Apocalypse is not pure blood, but Wolverine is, and and in all of these in all the 10 champions from Arrako, only Red Root is pure blood mutant.
And
So,
it's worth remarking in general that many of them are mutants. Basically everybody except for Pog or Pog are mutants.
Yeah.
But these are, like, what does it mean for them to be the first mutants, the pure blood mutants? Like,
and why is it
as
pure
opposed
blood?
to what, right?
Right.
And why is it reclaimed from Amenth? What does that mean? Because the pure blood mutant, shouldn't it be from Okaro? I mean Okara, instead of from Amenth, which is like the invasion, right? The dark forces that are invaded. So that was the part which I thought was pretty interesting.
Also, she's not just a translator. Her power is bottomancy. So she has control over the land itself. I think the little limerick that goes with her is, she is the field of battle, she is the meadow of decay, she is the undergrowth and dark, to stray too close rots life away. So she's more than just Doug.
Yep, I agree.
Now she's having a conversation with Summoner, who, the thing that caught my eye here is his little limerick is, white devil, white lies, a false front hides black flies, egg hatches, swarm grows, a hive seeks to colonize. Now, if this was just without the context of having read about all the Otherworld stuff, I'd be like, okay, well, that just sounds like Amenth and Arrako anyway, whatever. But we just got done being reminded of Hothive. And like, what did, it seems pretty loaded to have his line in the poem be about a hive seeks to colonize when we just were introduced on panel to the first time to Hothive. And it kind of brings up the idea of kind of who's infecting whom here.
Yeah, I mean, there's this little bit of things which I was like, oh, okay, wait, where did we just read about colony and things like that? But the other thing is that it could be a two-part riddle where one is talking about the champion and the other one is just talking about the sword. And so the second line refers to the sword, which is called colony.
Or it could be referring somehow to where they're going to go, where they're going to do their fight. Yeah. So he kind of tries to put one over on her a couple times. He's like, it's going to be great. You're going to live in paradise. You're never going to unsheath your sword. And then at the end, he's like, no, that was all a lie. But our two worlds are going to finally come together one way or another. And
that's
so,
for sure. Yeah.
Right. Where in the same way Doug was convinced ultimately to go, for the same reason, Red Root actually agrees to go too, even though neither of them really want to do the fighting.
Yeah. And I think Summoner has sort of lied to them before, because a piece of Arrako went back with Summoner, which is, I think, the mall thing.
Yeah.
No, the land that appears in that join with Krakoa.
Mm-hmm.
That's a piece of Arrako.
Oh, I thought they just meant his little shoulder bird, his little his little wooden parrot thing. No,
I think here it says there's one part where it mentioned, let me see.
As Tyler is looking for that.
Yeah, I need to find it now.
I wanted to kind of mention that wouldn't it have been so much better if we seen this part of it along with Doug's issue?
That's what I mentioned last week in last week's video. Like, if they actually layer it instead of doing focus, for mainly for the intention of like collecting it into a trade paperback, then it would actually read a lot better, because then you see the contrast and immediately.
And that's one of the things, like, until I saw ARRAKO'S face, I didn't even realize what's the point of this character is or what they're doing. And then it was like, because it was like, okay, they're trying to convince some other people to come and fight for them. But then it worked when we read it in Wolverine that that other, oh my God, Solemn was there, and there was a contrast between. Yeah, it worked so well, and we also see that their life is kind of the same, and then how they came to be, and then how they are, and this should have been in New Mutants 13. Like, that's where all of this should have been. So then we saw that, okay, it's not just Doug who is like, it's actually both of them who are not fighters, but who are warders, I mean, if that's a word, like, like who deals with words
Yeah.
are affected by this, and neither of them wants to fight. So it's more to do with their personality than to do with the individuals.
It's more of their allegiance to the land. Basically.
Allegiance to the like, I mean, all of it. Like, it just like it should have been. I mean, I almost want to, like, now cut the pages and put it in there. I'm making a lot of changes to my hardcover, you guys.
No, sounds like you might just need to do a custom bind at this
point. You got to do it yourself, yeah.
Well, I mean, if I could oversize them, I would.
I found the line. It says that, and why would she be? You came to us, begged for a piece of her, which she gave in the hopes of unification.
Right.
And I actually went back to I think issue 12, X-Men 12, where they first show Summoner going up, and he was actually, with a piece of land going up.
And then also, like, to that point though, when two company merges, some of the common things are getting laid off, common peoples are getting laid off. So between Doug and this one of them is getting laid off. We don't need two translators.
I have a funny story about that I now have to insert from my professional life. One time I was at a company that was going through a merger with a potential merger, which ultimately didn't go through, with another big company. And for their employee magazine, they wanted to draw the two of them like two puzzle pieces that would fit together, which is cute, So they draw their two very recognizable kind of corporate symbols going together. But the one of the puzzle pieces had like a knob, the part that juts out, and the other one had its little divot. And the comment I got back from internal review, because that's what my job was at the time, was it kind of just looks like one of us is fucking the other one right now. So then we had to make edits to the puzzle pieces. So each puzzle piece both had one knob and kind of one, receive. So that one company wouldn't just be effing the other one.
I did think about that, because I was like thinking in terms of like the female and the male connector.
Yes. Oh my god. Okay, engineer here. Male and female connector, and then also nipple. Like, like,
well,
I'm always like.
I've been reading a lot of puzzling stuff lately, and they refer to them a lot of times as knobs on a puzzle. I call them grabbies.
Polishing the knob.
Yeah. Oh boy, this show keeps veering in this direction.
All right,
next
moving
comes
on.
Pog's limerick is Pogger Pog's Pog and Pog's Pog, but Pogs are Pog then and Pog Pogs. And Pog is he's a dragon. He's basically just a dragon. He wants glittery stuff, and he wants to fight things. He's just this big alligator dragon dinosaur thing, and the internet loves him. The end. He's the new blob.
Yeah.
He's not a mutant. Neither is Captain Britain, so we have parallelism. Yeah. And they tempt him with jewels, and he's like, it's on. I don't have a whole lot else to say.
Coins.
Yeah.
Coins, not jewels.
No, I mean jewels. But when you say Captain Britain, I was thinking of coins.
He's coins.
Yeah, his card too. So
yeah, I was bored.
Yeah. Okay.
Moving on.
So the next one, this one potentially is so there's Bay the Blood Moon, who's portrayed as a seducer who wants to kill men, which kind of immediately, whenever I wants to kill men or no man shall, I always think of the end of Lord of the Rings, right? Like, I am no man. And I'm like, ooh, there's some women in the lineup of these champions. And, what happens if Bay, the Blood Moon, the seducer, comes up against one of the women? Do they count in terms of who she's looking to seduce? But that was really my only thought on that particular one.
Well,
but it was also like, I really liked it that it's like, yes, even before saying anything, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Like,
It's a battle, combat, yes.
Yeah.
Which is kind of what Gorgon said,
like,
right? On the other side, he was like, it's a contest. I've done this before, yes.
Come in.
Yes,
Yeah.
sure.
Well, there are two little bits of things which I thought might be interesting. Like when Summoner praise her, we are sure that this is a female character, right?
I think.
Because I wasn't sure whether she is a male or female character.
She could be a character of neutral gender until we hear otherwise.
Yeah. So it says something like, you are the speaker of the hidden words. And then her power is the doom note.
Yeah. Which made me think of like Siren and Dazzler.
Yeah,
and,
musical notes.
Yeah, musical notes.
Yeah. And then okay, just remember this first, because when we come to the tarot cards, I have something to say.
Yeah.
So
Okay. God, I've
We
been asked to
remember.
remember a lot of things. Free, did we get to the thing of yours I was supposed to remember already?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
We're done with that.
So then the next one, who I think in a way is the most interesting, and I'm going to have to call upon Tyler's memory here to help us, is the White Sword of the Ivory Spire, because he is one of the 100 who threw themselves into Amenth, who we were talking about quite a lot in a previous episode. And
He's the champion of the 100.
Right, and he wants something in return, and they kind of agree to give it to him.
Yeah.
What did you think about that?
I mean, I don't know what he would want. You know, that's the part which I'm not 100% sure. Like, why? What is his request? Like, what could they entice him to fight for them? When clearly here he's like, I'm not fighting for you. Like,
Bring back his destiny.
And then the final one, oh, sorry.
There's also Mystique. No, I'm just saying that how they're dangling destiny in front of Mystique.
Well,
so it's
they
like
are.
They're dangling this something.
Right, something.
I don't know.
And just interesting too how both
He's
him and
also
Mystique are
he
kind
also
of these,
looks.
they're like what's the word, like apostate. They're somebody who's been cast out, who's been brought back in, you know.
Oh, okay.
And he's also has like a same, like, I feel like his design reminded me a lot like Magneto.
I agree.
Like,
Well,
so
I thought he looks a little bit like, because of the blue skin, he looks a bit like Apocalypse.
Well, they could be related.
And he's older than Apocalypse.
Right.
So
now we get Iska the Unbeaten, who we've had some hints of already, but there's some interesting stuff that her mutant power is actually, she can't lose. It's not that she's just great at fighting. It's that much like Domino has luck, Iska can't lose, and that the idea that that's a curse. Like, what happens when you don't want to win, but you're cursed to win? So I'm sure that's going to become a plot point.
And
but
also
like,
looks very much like Storm.
Well, but does this sort of like predetermines the outcome of the duel?
Well, I think it's interesting, but I'm kind of surprised that we don't have a character like Domino involved, because it's like, who do you put up against somebody who's technically unbeatable? Is it Magic who's going to be fighting her? It's like, it's because there's going to be some kind of technicality of what it means, I think, to win. I suspect, and she's going to finally get the satisfaction of like losing, but still getting what she wants. I just get the feeling that this is portentous of kind of the way we're going to have to interpret her power in just a few issues.
Mm-hmm.
And then finally, at the end, we see Annihilation, who's the golden masked person who we will come back to later. Wow. So then we get 2 whole pages of Sword Errata as data pages, which I am going to just wholesale turn over to Tyler to tell us if there's anything interesting before we tackle the tarot cards.
I mean, we mentioned Colony, which when we talk about Hothive, and then earlier on when you were talking about the riddle. There is one other thing which I think, we talk about the Doom Note. We have one other thing which is, the sword that Bay the Blood Moon is wielding is called the Seducer. And in one of the cards that our champions got is talking about love. So, I mean, you kind of know where I'm getting at right now. And then the silhouette of that card also points to Bay, I think.
It's interesting stuff. So at the end of this section, I'm almost positive that it's only this middle section that has Asrar's art. Asrar usually has a very specific tell, which is a little notch that he does to round out the chin. It's omnipresent on almost every one of his characters, and it's really hard to spot here. You can see it on Iska, and if you go really close up on her face, part of me had to laugh because a lot of these characters have weird mask-like faces with no chins. I'm like, that's somebody smart who put Asrar on a series of characters with no chins. But the other thing that struck me, because I had to go back and look at some other Asrar comics, he's been colored a lot by Matthew Wilson on Conan with Jason Aaron. He just very recently was on X-Men and colored by Sonny Go, who I love, but they give him so much more texture, and I don't know if texture works as well for Asrar's art, because I found him almost at Larraz level here, and it's with Mardi Gras, who I've said some unkind things about the glossiness of Mardi Gras' colors, but I don't think I've ever seen Asrar look any better than this. I mean, I poured through like a dozen Asrar issues, and this is some of his best art that I think I've ever seen. I think him and Gracia ought to be working together all the darn time.
Yeah. I actually did not know Asrar was drawing in this issue when I first read it. I actually thought it was Larraz,
Straight
straight through. Yeah, so it was pretty seamless. I think we talk about art continuity, and the cape that Jamie wear became sort of a gag, but there's also a sort of continuity from issue to issue. I do have a little bit of a nitpick here, because the really Freya favorite panel shows a water based circle for the champions of Arrako, but when we switch to Asrar, is circle of dead bodies.
Yeah, and also, didn't they just boil away all the oceans? Why is there water?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Small things, tiny.
So to that point, like, I actually kind of saw that it was two of them, and I was also hard pressed to find out who's who, So I get that they wanted to make it like very seamless transition and all of that, but doesn't it also take away from the individuality of the artists? Like, if you're putting, why even bother having two artists if you're not going to let them be separate? Like, Tyler couldn't even tell that there was two different artists.
People on Twitter I was pointing it out to people last night as I was reading, and they were like, what? Like, they didn't even know which was which.
So in that case, like, what's the point of having two artists?
Time?
Well,
I guess.
I also see it as, in the same way that Larraz and Silva were with each other on Hoxpox, and it's like they just kept one-upping each other. There's definitely something to healthy competition in art that's not direct competition. And Asrar is somebody who is really quick. He hits his deadlines really well, and he's definitely seen as one of Marvel's big guns based on what they put him on. But I just felt like the level of cleanliness of line here was I've never seen it from him before. And I think I've seen every issue that he's drawn at least for the past 3 or 4 years. And it's like, there's something to be said to asking somebody to be like, look, you've got to stand up against this other artist who draws super clean. Can you do an issue that's super, super clean? And to see what that looks like in their style. I've been really into watching lately UK's Portrait Artist of the Year and Landscape Artist of the Year, which are really hard to get a hold of if you don't live in the UK, but they're beautiful reality programs that are just about classical painters, modern classical painters. And it's kind of interesting because it's like, don't lose your style, but do this thing. And that's a really interesting thing to ask of an artist. And I just think Asrar really stood up to it. So I don't, that's not an excuse for your question, Freya. I do think it's kind of like a little bit of it is like, would they have just taken Larraz on the full thing if they could have, if there was time? But at the same time, like, if Asrar's always going to be this good and this clean, like, I'm happy that he got to team up with Larraz. Like, great.
And that's like, I have nothing against like, teaming up and all that, but I feel like because it was such a distinct section.
Yeah. It could have looked more distinct.
Yeah. Why not make it different?
Right.
Because I always appreciate that when a distinct section looks different. And I think Jeff Lemire's Animal Man does that in the last issue because he draws like a 4-year-old. So when a 4-year-old telling the story, it's written like that. And
thumbs downs are coming.
But the thing is, over here, it's just like, okay, I can't even tell. And I actually had to Google which one Asrar did. So I don't know. I mean, at least like when we talked about that week where we loved all 3 issues, there was like a transition. Like you felt that. Here, it was like nothing.
Well, as I continued to interrogate it, the thing that I really noticed, especially in this last Larraz section, is Asrar uses really normal page layouts. And Larraz in this last session goes off on page layouts. We have this huge, the diagonal cut on the first page, the Apocalypse and Saturnine in the elevator, which we'll get to as a scene, but just the art, the way that it kind of looks down, but then it also looks from beneath them. All of the 6-up pages, which are pretty much in the shape of like long tarot cards as we cycle through everybody and the different angles. It takes magic from above as she lays backwards. I mean, Larraz just... that's when it became really obvious to me who was who, because Larraz, you can't imitate these choices. Like, he's just got an eye. Anyway, sorry. I was stunned. I was completely stunned by the last third of the issue, just speechlessly stunned.
No, I completely agree with the art and everything. If only Saturnine did not look like Amethyst. I cannot stand it. I cannot stand it. I cannot deal with it because it's like it's so much, and then I can't. Anyway, it's fine.
All right, so now we're into
that's my only criticism.
the final section, which is pretty much just the Krakoans arriving and being shown to their rooms, but they don't have mints on their pillow. They have tarot cards. So I'm a huge tarot card fan. I have several dozen tarot card decks. I'm not super fast as a reader, but I did not just use my own knowledge here. I used the tarotguide.com to kind of help me make sure I'm interpreting things correctly. But I do have the 8 cards here. We never get to see Gorgon's cards, but we do get Tarot's interpretation of them. And Tarot mostly is doing a straight up interpretation. So since the only real scene to talk about is Apocalypse's scene, who's the last card anyway, I thought we could kind of just lightning round through these cards, hopefully faster than we did through the Otherworld. And I picked this set out of all my sets. I don't even know what it's called. It's just in this little beautiful box because this 9 of Swords screamed Betsy Braddock to me when I saw it. So this is the 9 of Swords. It's not a card about bad things happening. It's a card about anxiety of bad things happening. So it's about remorse, guilt, anguish, self-recrimination. And Tarot says that she's ruining herself with her own fears and nightmares. So it's a very consistent interpretation to this card. What do you think that means, though, for Betsy? What is this thing that she's so anxious about and blaming herself?
I mean, we have seen that throughout Excalibur.
Just like the way everything's happening?
Yeah, everything's happening. And then also becoming Captain Britain and not being accepted. So I guess like that's where it's coming from.
Yeah, I feel like this is the card that Saturnine basically planted in her room. That's the only reason why everyone gets a card, because she wants to like F with her. She's like, here, this is the card about you. I want to make you anxious. Because you took the sword that is for my beloved,
Although Tarot says this is a bad card. Like, it's not, no tarot card is a bad card necessarily. But it's interesting that her interpretation is that, like, almost that Betsy's anxiety is, like, weighing her down. It's a bad card because you got to let it go.
So, I mean, you are more involved in the tarot card, but the thing is, isn't the whole idea of the tarot card is the eye of the beholder? Like, it's like you can interpret it however you want. So, I mean, I don't know. Like, would I have interpreted it as an anxiety?
Yeah, well, and they classically have certain meanings, but then a good reader will ascribe the right meaning. So Tarot, being theoretically the best tarot card reader of Krakoa, is kind of ascribing meaning past what we could just get from like a tarot guidebook. So I trust her here, where she says this is a bad card in terms of Psylocke. So the next one is the 2 of Cups, which is for Doug. And this is a positive card of unity and love. It's a good omen. It can indicate popularity, and Doug certainly is popular with fans and creators these days. And Tarot says it's not a card of true love. It's the Lovers is not a card of true love. This one is. It means harmony, but harmony can be perilous in times of war. Do we think that Doug is just going to snuggle up with whoever his opponent is? What does this mean? Doug's a lover, not a fighter.
Yeah, I know. I mean, the silhouette looks a little bit like, Bay. Also looks a little bit like Iskar here. So
I think it looks like Solemn or like the White Knight guy. It looks, I don't know.
Yeah. But that's one thing. The other thing, the thing that sort of like swung me towards Bay is because, she's the speaker of hidden words, and that's power is to interpret, to understand language, and I mean the other thing of course is like we have seen before, Cypher and Warlock becoming one.
I'm not gonna sing When Two Become One, but you can just hear that playing in your head.
And then of course in Life 9, Krakoa and Cypher became one.
So Doug's destiny is to smash. Next up, so we skip over Gorgon, who discards his cards, and they can't be seen by Tarot. And the next one is the Knight of Pentacles. This is sort of a peculiar take on it, although maybe it goes well with Captain Britain. So in my reading, the Knight of Pentacles, it can mean common sense and responsibility. But ominously, one phrase that jumped out at me in Tarot Guide was, it means finishing what you start and defending your home, which is like pretty significant for Captain Britain. Taro makes the point that we've been bringing up throughout the episode, and maybe this is where Tyler had his one point he wanted to bring up, that pentacles are often coins, and they speak often of practicality and prosperity, but it means that, will you work for what has to be done, which I think kind of jives well with the idea that there's a card about responsibility and like, are you going to take it?
Yeah. I mean, I just thought that like in the picture, it looks like he's defending Avalon, and he's the Knight of Avalon. So I don't know. Maybe he's also becoming the Knight of Crooked Market.
Interesting, right? Because Crooked Market much more closely associated with wealth,
coins, and wealth. Yeah.
All right. So next up, we have magic. This panel, first of all, I think is utterly gorgeous. Magic is the Page of Wands. So the Page of Wands is a card of good news and bright ideas, possibly of starting something new. Taro makes a comment that it indicates arrogance, which I thought was more of the reversed version of it, but magic is like lying upside down in the panel, so I don't know if Larraz was maybe like taking some artistic license with that, and we were supposed to be reading the reverse meaning. Again, not an expert tarot reader, very much a novice. So she says it's a tricky one, never stuck in one place, which is certainly true of magic.
And I think like of all of the I was just saying of all of them, she's the only one who liked her card.
Yeah,
like,
she seems
she's
nice.
happy with it. Yeah.
And,
No, I mean the card also describes. Tarot also describes the card as a good friend to have. So I'm not sure if magic would actually jump in to help Doug.
Interesting. And again, arrogance, right? Like, of course she would jump in, but is that going to mess something up in some way?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, interesting catch. All right, next. We have Cable the Fool. So the Fool, it's not a bad card. It doesn't mean you're dumb. It tends to be about new beginnings. It's about a new mind. It's about naivete and spontaneousness. And Taro's reading is a very classic reading of the Fool, right? Like, don't be offended. The Tarot is sometimes called the Journey of the Fool. The Fool doesn't know things yet, but he will learn. It's a card about the folly of youth. And if we have any character who is youthful and full of folly here, it's Team Cable.
Yeah. I also want to point out that his sword is a memory card. It contains knowledge. So,
Freya, did you have any thoughts on our young fool?
No, I was just going to say that he knows nothing about tarot card because he took the literal meaning of it and then was very upset, like as any teenager would do.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, and honestly, to be honest, I wouldn't want that card in my hotel bedroom. Thank you, people, now.
I just thought that the line is like so perfect. It's like, oh, come on.
Yeah, it's very teenager. It's very like in line with that and what we have seen so far of him.
Next, we have Wolverine with strength, and Taro rightfully points out this is not physical strength necessarily. It can mean inner strength. It can mean overcoming challenges, things we know Wolverine certainly is up for. And it seems I thought it showed him struggling with Summoner rather than Solemn. Yeah, so I thought that was interesting.
I thought that was a little bit of a twist. And, in also the background looks a little bit like Everforge.
Would make sense for Wolverine, who's a living weapon, to be, and with adamantium to be fighting in the Everforge.
Yeah.
And then finally, before we come to Apocalypse, we have Death, which Storm seems very taken aback, even though she's the queen, her husband is the ruler of the land of the dead. Death is an indication of transformation and of moving on, not depending on the status quo, which, Taro rightfully says doesn't mean you're going to die necessarily. But, Storm, there's speculation is swirling about who's going to live or die. Betsy hasn't been on covers. Doug hasn't been on covers. Would they kill or, Otherworld brain scramble Storm? And because this death is a very, very easy interpretation to be like, well, this could just mean having a new mind, which is very much the consequence of this combat.
But isn't that, or what you just read on like not being status quo, that's also Storm, because she's of so many different roles.
Very
like something
true.
something that Tyler pointed out before. So I mean, that's one of the reasons I was like, she doesn't know tarot card either.
No, but the word metamorphosis is the one that sort of like struck me, because it's like if you are an amalgam of different storms from different reality, you're actually changing yourself, right? You metamorphosize, right?
Yeah.
So that's one thing. And, sorry.
Isn't that what Storm is, though?
I think
Like,
so
she
too.
has so much. She has so many roles. So she's like, so she's a goddess from one reality, queen from another reality, or like teacher from. That's what she is.
That's me.
So what is how is that even different?
Okay. Then the other thing is this, right? In the picture in the card, right? It looks like she is death, and she's leading a group of people behind her, right? And of the 10 province, which province is dead now?
The
Dryador.
Exactly.
The D1. Okay.
And Storm is also an Omega mutant.
And she's carrying a banner, like leading,
Yep.
It's not like death approaching her. It's she is approaching as death.
Yep. That's the way I was reading this. And then it sort of plays into the whole idea of Omega mutants trying to rule the provinces. Because we do have Monarch, we do have Mercator. If that is the real Mercator, we have her. So, so I don't know. I mean, I'm just thinking like maybe that is her role.
Then this is also a reversal of her current role in Krakoa, where she's the hype woman
bringing
of
people
bringing people to life and introducing them. Now this is like she's leading the dead. So does this mean all the people that regenerated are all dead?
Well,
not necessarily real.
Couldn't you read the card the same way, though, that if she's holding the banner of transformation, isn't she already kind of acting in that death capacity on Krakoa by welcoming people back as they kind of like go through a metamorphosis to become themselves again? It's kind of like a snake swallowing its own tail. Like all of it's actually, I think it's quite clever. Storm is all of these things, and it really makes me focused on her more so than some of the other characters. But now, because that's a lot. I've now been through 10 Otherworlds, 7 tarot cards. The 8th one is the Lovers. And the Lovers symbolizes harmony and union, but it also can make a choice, and it can mean a warning that you're mixing business with pleasure. Speaking of which, Fariha, what did you think about the final reveal to Apocalypse here? Mixing his business in the tournament with the pleasure of Genesis.
I actually thought that it was very out of character, and that me not knowing Apocalypse so much, because I was like, really? Like, and Saturday actually says it. I'm like, thank you, someone said it. Like, he's that upset by a card? He
seemed very offended. Very offended.
Very offended. Like, it's like, that's the thing I expect from Wolverine, because he's a doofus. So he's supposed to be the leader of this team, and he's taken out that easily. Like, no wonder survival of the fittest. You are not the fittest.
Well, I really don't think you're strong enough. No.
He was the one who says patience, and then now he's like, I have no patience.
I don't know. Like, I just found that to be very like weird, and I'm like, ugh, like, that's like Magneto would not care for this. Like, I don't know. I didn't like that. Like, just like, seriously, really, a card, like not even a card, like just 2 words.
Yeah. And
but
also,
is he offended by the Lovers or offended by death looming over them?
It doesn't matter. He's offended by a card. That I take issue with that. Like, you should not be offended by it. Like, if you are the leader, if you are in charge of something so huge, and you are leading these people, you need to be a little bit better than that. That's like, I expect my leaders to be a little bit, have more, this is like some Trump level shit.
Well, like, there is. I thought this sequence was really packed with a lot of interesting stuff. Aside from the art just stunning me, as we've covered, Saturnine goes on this very Aaron Sorkin walk and talk with Apocalypse, and he's like standing there still, and her assistant is like, she expects you to follow if you want to keep talking. So they kind of, and she's like, I'm on my way to my next meeting. They have this beautiful scene in the elevator with him looking down and her looking up, and kind of arguing over the card and what it means. And And I just think it's so interesting because as we touched on last issue episode is Apocalypse's weakness is his love. Like this whole survival of the fittest shtick of his is basically being like, I was not strong enough to be a lover, and so here I am as a fighter because love is my weakness, right? And sure enough, Saturnine tried to hit everybody where they're a little bit weak with these cards as we started out talking with Betsy, and she definitely hits Apocalypse where it hurts. And we get this beautiful page of him advancing down this long hallway to the next meeting, and the next meeting casts aside the golden helm, which we've seen consume other people, and beneath the golden helm is his former partner Genesis, I think, if I'm not reading this incorrectly. And Apocalypse, if you zoom in on the panel, it's great. He has his face like this. It looks like the Pikachu meme, the really blurry meme where Pikachu, and he goes, tell me how, and you know, we all, it's just a great moment. It's beautiful, it's surprising, and I think that it sets us up for some interesting stuff.
Yeah.
And honestly, I think it would have made more sense if he was controlled until that moment.
Yeah,
you know
from
what
a dramatic
I mean?
perspective.
You know, from the dramatic, like if he was controlled, like, oh, you're not like, you know, like you're not getting to my head. Yeah, you wouldn't get that. And then that Pikachu moment happened.
But if he wasn't angry, then he wouldn't be in the elevator with Saturnine.
Oh, maybe he just went on to talk about logistics issue about the tournament. I don't know,
Okay.
like, you know, rules. Listen, this is not real life, you know.
Right.
You can write this.
Write a meeting.
Yeah. Write it properly.
Yeah.
Like, you can
Yeah.
make that happen. I mean, I don't know. And that's one of the reasons I was like, okay, come on. Like, he should not be. And that's also me not knowing enough about Apocalypse. It's just like little I know. I always thought him to be a little bit more in control. But it seems like it's undone by a tarot card.
Well,
And
no,
Genesis.
and in a way, this is like the most important Apocalypse story of all time. I mean, if we look back to old Apocalypse stories, what are the greatest hits, really, Tyler? It's like The Fall of the Mutants, which is a classic story that I'd recommend to anybody.
Yep.
We don't learn a lot about him. 12, which was a total botch job where they had rumored it for so long and they dropped the ball. And then what, like Blood of Apocalypse at the end of Peter Milligan's run? There's only so many big Apocalypse stories, and we never
the
really...
Age of Apocalypse
Age of
doesn't
Apocalypse.
really even appear, right? I mean, he's more like, you know, the one controlling behind the
he's like the
scenes most of
Sauron?
the-
Is that Sauron?
Kind of like, I mean, he wasn't really that much involved because it's really just a alternate take of all the characters at that point in time.
Well, it's it's an early take on him, really. I mean, he's not that old of a character at that point. What, like 8 years old? And it's very just like, well, if Apocalypse is in charge, everybody would fight each other and mutants would be primary. But it actually tracks really well to what we're learning here. Like, I do think we're going to end this with a whole new appreciation of what Apocalypse really is as a character, and it's going to actually make it fun to reread things like Fall of the Mutants and Age of Apocalypse.
Yeah. And wasn't he the one who infected Cable?
Yes, indeed he was.
Yeah.
So,
I do have one small thing to ask you guys.
Yeah.
Is when we see Saturnine did that throwing of the star thing, like, you know, she says that as I call my powers to me as I wished it, so it shall be, and then she threw that thing in. Like, is this the first time we see her power? I mean, see her do something like that? Is she casting a spell, or I don't know, or is she like talking to someone higher up?
I didn't know how to take it, honestly. Fariha did that. It kind of reminded me of Stardust, you know, when the king flings the necklace out the window and it turns into a star and that comes back as Claire Danes.
No, I was just thinking, like, I don't know. She's just probably... I mean, who cares? I'm not a Saturnine fan. I'll be honest with you. I'm not. It's like, why are we doing this? But anyway, here we are.
So here we are. We had 10 Otherworlds. We had 10 swords people on each side, and plus a new 10 swords, and then 8 of 10 tarot cards. What is that? 40, 50? I've lost count. So this really, truly was a source book. Every page was dense with information, if not with plot. Now, having dug into all of it at length, Would you say you're more excited than you were at the beginning of this episode to read on into our final 5 weeks of this crossover, or less excited than you were at the beginning of this episode?
So in one of the previous episodes, we talked about that X-Men should be read together because it brings people together, and it's all about, like, you start with hating it, and then this issue, I started the episode not liking it, but after all the explanation and everything, I kind of like it.
Tyler, did you come around too?
Yeah, I mean, I do enjoy, like I said, piecing the puzzles together. I just wish that the format has been slightly different, so that we don't get such a big up and such a low downs, so that everything evens out and it becomes better, hopefully above average across the board. And I think that, like you guys mentioned, like I think Fariha mentioned earlier, like narratively, I mean, when you look at it in contrast, it makes a lot more sense and it gels a lot better. Like, you remember it a lot better than if it's all split up this way, across like different weeks.
And also, like, we know that from Hickman's Avengers that he knows how to do a let's get the team together moment in Avengers 3. I was so disappointed by this middle part over here that, I'm like, I know you can make it funny or you can make it like super exciting and super sexy, but it's like, oh, okay, we're just gonna go grab these people. There's no spark to it. Like, I wasn't like, ooh, Arrako has these people. I'm like, who are you? I don't know. It just, versus in X-Force when Solem was recruited, that actually made me was like, ooh, that's a worthy opponent. Mm-hmm. So,
if anything, I think my takeaway is really similar to yours, which is kind of like X-Men and a lot of Hickman comic books are better with friends. Like, I think about the experience of sitting alone and reading this, and it just didn't come off that interesting to me. But, like, not only in conversation with you both, even though it was a lot of me talking, but just like the little barbs we trade back and forth beforehand and us trying to figure out what the questions are going to be, like, that's what makes X-Men fun. And you could argue that's what makes all comics fun, and comics certainly can be a social exercise, but I really think that this X-Men run, there's just so much to it. There's so many themes to it that if you're reading it all by yourself, I don't know that you're getting as much as it's willing to give to. And it's not to say, like, shame on you for not having friends who read comics, because before the internet, I did not have friends who read comics, but we're really happy you're watching this with us. We hope we're bringing you some of that fun, and hopefully you're taking that fun. If you're on Twitter and you are on X Twitter, follow a couple of the big folks on X Twitter. Xavier Files is one of the big ones. Yeah. And get into the conversation, because this is the joy of X-Men comics, right? Even though right now in the world we can't necessarily stand around in a comic book shop or get together with each other, at least we could be on the internet and kind of uncover all of this fun stuff, which was the same fun energy that Hoxpox had last year. So I'm leaving this hopeful. I know I said I was going to be grumpy in the middle of 3 weeks of Hickman and Teeny Howard, but I think it's looking up for me. So that is it from us for a very lengthy, very exhaustive this week in X-Men.
Oh, there's something in which I forgot.
Wait,
sorry.
Tyler, we always have Tyler's final word.
One small thing.
It wouldn't be the end of an episode without a final word from Tyler.
I don't know if the renaming of Genesis' sword is intentional. Because in Creations, her sword is called Twilight Blade.
It is.
And over here is Midnight.
Interesting. X-Men is next, which is a straight up Hickman issue, so I'll be interested to see if it just picks up with the remaining part of the history of Arrako.
Well, and the Krakoan tag says truth.
Well, on that, we leave you folks. This has been Peter, Tyler, and Fariha with yet another week of This Week in X. Take care, everyone. Be well.